So I'm giving 3 tutorials, and I am going to try to, we'll see how ambitious I can be in getting through the topics for today, but this is the plan as I have laid it out across the 3 different days. So today is meant to be kind of scene setting, pretty high level. Why do we study animal cognition? A little bit of a historic overview, talking about human biases that we have and thinking about non-human minds, introducing some of the methods that people use for studying animals, and then thinking about distinction between what animals learn and how animals learn. Day 2, I'm going to talk more about the content of specific problem spaces. So I'm really going to focus on diversity across the animal kingdom in solutions to common problems. So I'm going to talk about space, focusing on the case study of navigation. I thought it would be fun for this audience to talk about number knowledge and numerosity in animals. I'm going to talk about approximate versus exact numbers and ratio understanding, inferential statistics, and things like that. That would be fun. I'm going to talk about objects and the specific case use of tools, and then how animals reason about other animals, which probably, given time constraints, will spill over to day 3, where I will talk about more kind of higher order thinking, things that we think of as very human-like, things like theory of mind, episodic memory, metacognition, thinking about thinking, and other kinds of things that involve sort of expectations about representations, calculations on calculations, and then thinking about how the ways in which we ask questions in animals might connect to and inform, and in some cases pull apart from the way that we ask those questions in AI. Just kind of summarize, today I'm going to talk about how people study animals. Tomorrow I'll talk about different solutions to common problems. And then on Friday, I will talk about more quote-unquote complex or potentially human-like cognition. Okay, so I'd like to come back to, sorry, Jacob. I'd like to come back to a quote that Jacob said yesterday. It's just the best-known pattern recognition system is the human brain. I understand you were actually quoting Peter Grassberger, or paraphrasing Peter Grassberger, and you already protested me putting this in, so I'm sorry. Anyway, I just would like to, to say that certainly that might be the case when compared to computer vision, when compared to AI, but humans as a pattern recognition system are merely one example of many, many different species, all of which have evolved to recognize patterns in their environment. And I think the point is that evolution is a very good optimizer of certain kinds of calculations. And I just want to show you an example of a chimpanzee. Let me see if I can do this. I got to go over here.
The scientists at Japan's primate...
Oh, hold on. Wait, it's doing a thing. Nope. Okay, hold on. I got to do it this way.
The scientists at Japan's Primate Research Institute, the PRI,
sorry, it wouldn't let me cut the video, so I got to go to 133. What does it say now? Okay, we'll just watch it.
In 30 attempts, Chris only once reached 9.
So they show these numerals 1 to 9. They flash up on the screen,
blanked over.
And then as soon as you touch the first one, they're masked.
Well.
And the task is to, as quickly as possible, sequence them. And so this is Ayumu, very famous.
When Ayumu sat the same test, he correctly
chimpanzee in
remembered the
Japan.
numbers almost 90% of the time.
She is.
I usually get every time, and I've got it right once.
Yeah, she is incredibly fast at this task.
His species down.
And even humans, and you might say, well, she's overtrained in it, right? Like we could be just as good. Even when you give humans the same exposure, the same training, she is faster at this task, dramatically faster and more accurate. Yeah.
Other
Okay.
chimps are the
But one thing that I would like to highlight is that this is a very context-limited skill. So this is something that, based on differences in working memory, and the sort of training and constraint of that task, she is incredibly good at. However, we'll come back to this tomorrow. When we're talking about the training process, not of sequencing the order of numbers, but actually learning each of the numbers and what those numbers represent. So it's something that young kids have to do. Something hopefully all of us have already done by the time we get to IPAM. But, just understanding that, like, 1, the numeral corresponds to one thing, and 2, the numeral corresponds to 2 things, and 5 corresponds to 5 things. This is typically tested in young children by the give me X task, where you say, give me 3 cookies, or, 3 teddy bears, give me 5. And there's a like very slow accumulation as children go from being a 1 knower. You can give 1, but once you give more than 1, it's, who knows, any number. It sort of just becomes approximate. Not any number, but it's not exact. And then they over time become 2 knowers, where then they can give you 1 or 2, but then 3 just turns into blah, blah, blah. And then they become 3 knowers, and then they learn the successor function, and then they learn that each next number is 1 and exactly 1 greater than the other one. And the chimpanzee never learns that. So each number, she can solve the same task. She can read a number 6 and give you 6 objects, but it has taken her just as long to learn the number 6 and the number 7 as it has taken her to go from 1 to 2. Or from 7 to 8. And so there's never that moment of understanding the system. So I will come back to that when we talk about number tomorrow, but I just want to sort of highlight the fact that, I really think that the idea of what animal is smarter than what other animal is kind of a fool's errand, because it really strongly depends on context. It strongly depends on the way in which you're asking that question. It really depends on the age of the animal, and whether you're looking at what they're doing in their natural environment or what they're doing in the laboratory. And so what I hope to do across these tutorials is to show you some fun videos of animals, get you to think about animals in some interesting ways, raise some hopefully kind of piquant points, and to hopefully contextualize the way in which we think about humans. Yeah?
Do humans usually learn at the same point to generalize? Like they learn 1, 2, 3, and they generalize, or does it depend on?
There's some variation, and there's a lot we don't know across languages. I'll come back to it tomorrow. But there is usually, you go 1, and then, it takes you longer to get from 0 to 1 than it takes you to get from 1 to 2. It takes you longer to do that than to get from 2 to 3. And then some kids get it at 4. Some kids go 4 to 5 and get it. But languages and the routines that kids have and their exposure to number do seem to make a big difference. There's really some interesting work. Again, sorry, I'm giving my talk tomorrow today. So there's some really interesting work that suggests that having a number line and having practice of using numbers and ordering them before you understand what each of those numbers mean is not only helpful but necessary. So I will come back to that. Yeah.
Are there any other animals that can do that generalization step? Maybe scrub jays or crows, or one of those that are good at multi-step?
I don't know of any that get that inflection in numerosity, but there certainly are other kinds of tasks. So absolutely, animals will have these aha moments. They will have insight. They can learn rules. They can generalize to new tasks. But I just wanted to point out that it isn't that chimps are inherently better at counting. It's just they're better at one narrowly defined kind of task that happens to involve numbers. Okay, did anyone else? Yeah.
I'm of a certain age, so I'm aware that that sequence of words thing is a test that we do for cognitive diminishment of. Is the same sort of thing available to you with other symbols rather than numbers? Or?
Yeah. There's a lot of yes. It's just a working number. It's just a working memory task. So you can do. This happens to be like I think she has always been tested with that particular task in the same order. But you can also be given like a number spread or a letter spread or. Remember these pictures in sequence. There are a bunch of different tasks across species, and I don't. Let me answer that tomorrow when I've Googled it. Yeah, I'm not. I know that task pretty well, and I know her things on facial perception and some other things. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry. Okay, you will very quickly come to realize that people keep being oh, Erica knows about animals. I'm there's so many animals and so many tasks that I'm not going to know that. A lot of the times I'm going to say, that's a great question. Let me look it up for you. Okay, anyway, so I just want to start with why study animal cognition, other than animals are cute and infinitely Googleable, and they have fun memes. There are obviously very, very many reasons to study animal cognition, particularly when we're interested in developing foundational models of intelligence. But what I would like to highlight today and tomorrow is that I think one of the I think most promising reasons to really look at not just say use a non-human animal model, but animals writ large, is that they provide greater diversity in our thinking about other minds. So they provide greater diversity of substrates, thinking about bodies and brains, greater diversity of problems that they encounter, so different kinds of behaviors that they produce, different environments that they are in, and different kinds of solutions. So both different types of calculations, different forms of learning. And I think that all of these are really important and useful in providing us with sort of expanding the boundaries of our own thinking about what it means to have a mind and what types of problems are out there, what types of solutions are out there. So just quickly thinking about bodies and brains, coming to some of the, one of the examples has come up several times today. We have C. elegans on one end, has 302 neurons. I learned that today. That was great. I was I'm going to put that on my talk. And sort of on the other end of the number of neuron spectrum, you have the African elephant, which has 257 billion neurons. However, humans have 87 billion. Sorry, anyway. Humans have much fewer, but it's really one of the big things is not just overall neuron count. I just put that in there because it was a cute comparison. There's a lot of differences in the distribution, organization, and neural architecture that obviously really matter. Yes?
And do you know, with synaptic connectivity, do humans have more synaptic connections than?
That is a great question for a neuroscientist.
Yes.
I am not one of those.
There is a lab that is very much focused on that. And in fact, the elephant brain versus human brain is one of her examples. And the number of connections and the connectivity in the human brain compared to the number of neurons is way more complex. Also, when you have such a big body, a lot of the neurons in the elephant is just to control that giant body. So it doesn't necessarily mean higher cognitive capacities. But yeah, so there is a lot of work on that, and she thinks it's actually the number of connections and not just the neurons that matter.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting things, say, comparing between birds and bird brains and mammal brains because of the way that the neurons are distributed, whether the brains are wrinkly or smooth, and the sort of opportunities for forming connections. And I am not a neuroscientist, so I'm doing a lot of gesticulating, but I do know enough to know that this guy has fewer neurons than this guy. Yeah.
This might be one of those Google questions, but do, for example, psychedelics on animals stimulate the neurons in ways that are similar to the humans?
Great question. Rich, have you showed anyone, any animals, your videos from? Pranav was comparing to the psychedelic visualization. I don't. I mean, there have been psychedelic studies on animals. Again, that is not like my area of expertise, so I don't know the specific results of those. But I mean, I do know that animals, do respond to psychotropic or substances. Yeah, was that?
They do, yeah. There's like fear extinction studies using MDMA with rodents and with humans. It mostly works on connections as opposed to necessarily just the firings. There's a bunch of studies on that.
Awesome. All right. I'm just going to run through this quickly. So these are just meant to sort of illustrate differences in problems. So moving from something like coral polyps, which land in one place, are stuck, filter feed, compared to something like the Clark's nutcracker, which stores up to 98,000 piñon seeds each year and then recovers the vast majority of those. So they are an example of animal that has fantastic caching ability, fantastic spatial awareness and spatial cognition, and really highly selected for and evolved memory in spatial memory in particular. And so just thinking about the differences in the problems of how to get food when you're a creature that is stuck in one spot and filtering the water as it passes by versus an animal that is actively caching, remembering, and retrieving food. And then thinking about differences in the kinds of solutions that you might have. So use something like the bar-tailed godwit, which navigates over huge distances using magnetic orientation. And then you have desert ants, which create local landmarks and use those to navigate. We're going to come back to these specific examples tomorrow when I talk about navigation. Okay, so I want to talk briefly about kind of continuing on some of the things that Ida raised with thinking about a historical overview. And I am not going to go all the way back. I really appreciate your giving this broad scope. I'm going to talk a little bit about behaviorism, but I do want to talk about Clever Hans because I think that sort of the shadow of Clever Hans has sort of continues to this day. So Clever Hans, I assume this is something that everyone is sort of broadly familiar with, but he was a German horse at the turn of the 20th century. His trainer/owner sort of promoted him as someone who could answer questions about mathematics, could answer questions about spoken German, could answer questions about time, and he typically would answer by pawing the ground. So there were, made a lot of money, a lot of people were very interested, but then there was an investigation into his abilities, which found that when his owner didn't know the correct answer, say when he was given a math problem, but his owner saw a different math problem, then Hans would give the wrong answer. So if they, held up the card that said 2 + 8 to Hans, and they held up a card, the owner saw a different card that said 7 + whatever 52, then Hans would give an incorrect answer. And so the conclusion of this investigation was that he was responding to his trainer's cues. And this has sort of been exposed or hypothesized about a number of different animals. And I put unconscious in parentheses, right? Because I think that there are a lot of people who really think that their animal can do X thing and are not trying to dupe anyone, but nevertheless, their animal might be responding to their own understanding of that task. And this is not just something that we have to be concerned about in studying animals. It's also something that we're concerned about when we're studying human children. So one of the reasons why, if you're testing infants, which typically sit on their parents' lap, when you're testing them, you have to give their parents blocked out sunglasses and headphones, because otherwise the child is sitting there and you're like playing some stimulus to them, and you're hoping, oh, will the child notice when X happens, right? Will the child notice when it switches from French to Japanese, right? And if the mom is sitting there and it switches and the mom goes, ooh, right? And then the baby goes, huh. And then the researchers go, ah. So, so we really need to be careful about these potentially unconscious cues. So I just want to show you, I don't have a video of Hans, he was pre-video, but I do have a nice video from Instagram of essentially the same task.
Okay. 18 minus 11.
Well, it's not working. Why are you not working? There you go.
Good girl. Give mommy kisses. Another kiss. Another kiss. Oh, good girl. Good job, baby.
All right, wait, let's just do that again.
Ready?
I don't know why there's a lag.
Okay. 18 minus 11. Good. Another kiss.
And what I want you to notice here is that this very adorable dog, not as cute as Bonnie, don't worry, is that he's doing exactly the same thing that Hans did that they noticed in the investigation, that as they reached the correct answer, they would slow down, right? And so it's like, I'm doing a thing, I'm getting feedback from you, okay, right? And so you saw, like, even that last one, it's like, all right, I'm checking, right? And so I think it's just a really beautiful example. You can find a lot of these, if you just YouTube, like, my parrot understands math or whatever. Okay, so, they're cool. They're really cool, but these animals are not doing arithmetic. Now, I will come back to cases tomorrow where I think like animals really, are capable of doing doing sort of implicit statistics. They're capable of, counting in a number of different ways. Solving these kinds of tasks is not one of them. Okay, so one of the things that I think sort of comes up when you're asking questions about comparative cognition or developmental psychology or cognitive psychology broadly is whether a behavior is quote unquote intelligent. And I just wanted to put sort of a few examples. They're all egg themed. I think I was like, eggs. I don't know. Anyway, so just to give you some examples of things where there are behavioral changes changes in biological systems in response to something in the environment. Is that behavior quote unquote intelligent? So reptile eggs will develop our temperature dependent sex development. So when the temperature is warmer, then they develop into female embryos. When they're cooler, they develop into male embryos. This is a painted turtle, which we have in Indiana, for anyone who's curious. Great. Male sticklebacks they nest guards. The female lays eggs, and males hang out near the little hollowed out nest here, and they fan water across their eggs. And they do it more quickly as oxygen levels drop, right? So that you could think about this as, oh, they're aware of this, they're doing that. I would argue this is, as many people have, this is an evolved behavior. They're not, taking a reading, calculating, thinking about how fast they're doing something. But nevertheless, it is a behavior that, is evolutionarily advantageous. It is produced flexibly by the animal, but in relation to something changing in the environment, right? So they're doing it in different ways, but they are doing it, coming back to this, I just point about external environmental changes. They're doing it in response to something in the environment. Now, compare that to something like this, where predators, like say a raccoon, can learn to search for turtle egg nests where humans have very helpfully marked nests. So a lot of times humans will put up markers to say, watch out, there's a turtle nest here, and in some places, animal predators and potentially potentially human animal predators, I'm not sure, but they have learned to associate these human structures with the presence of turtle eggs, and so they are like, thank you very much for marking these. We will now dig and eat the eggs. Thanks. So, I think one of the things, I think that a lot of us have an intuition that sort of the behavior on the right here is more quote unquote intelligent. At least I would tend, does everyone agree? Does anyone, okay, just, yes.
But would you say that in the first case, it's evolution being intelligent in some sense? Would that?
Yeah, I mean, I think those of us in evolutionary biology like to stay away from like the use of the term intelligent when it comes to evolution, but certainly the intelligence of the system could be absolutely. I mean, evolution is a much better designer, quote unquote, than humans. I do not think, I mean, the difference is that humans are intentionally designing something with a goal in mind, and evolution is not. And so I do think that it's really important when we're talking about this evolved to do this thing, evolution doesn't have foresight. So evolution doesn't have a goal in and of itself for the future, if that's helpful. But yeah, I certainly I think the time scale matters, and whether you're thinking about an individual or a community and a behavior matters.
But doesn't the question of goals also come up in the third one? You don't know whether the predator has a goal of finding X or if it's just doing something and then.
Sorry?
Doesn't the question of whether the predator has a goal come up in the third one? Like you don't know the predator's doing the behavior because it's trying to find an egg or if it's just doing. Like you're saying that you don't want to say that evolution has a goal because it's just trying things and then it.
For individual.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that here, I mean, predators are not digging a hole every 2 inches, and I mean, is very hard. I mean, these are buried feet deep in the ground. It's a huge amount of effort to do that, and so I think it is much more likely that once that maybe when humans like dig up a nest and then rebury it, and then there's a scent there, and then they come to associate that with this. It could also be that they associate humans with food, so they're investigating human So I think there are lots of possible explanations. I, mostly thought it was an interesting example, but yeah. Okay, so I would like to, I think I can go really quickly through behaviorism because I think I did a really nice job of sort of laying the foundation there. One of the things that I would like to, I think I used some of the same cartoons. I was like, I gotta check this one out. So behaviorism really focused on the behavior of individuals, and believes that the sources of behavior are external rather than internal, and that behavior both can and should be explained without reference to internal states, to internal mental states. One of the things that I would like to highlight is that this is a very American school of thought, of psychology. There were a lot of ethological perspectives, particularly Nico Tinbergen and Konrad Lorenz, that sort of began in Europe around the end of the 19th century. And so when we're talking about behaviorism and the pushback against behaviorism, this wasn't a linear sequence of everyone had behaviorism and then everyone pushed that out and there was something else, right? Different places in the world had different viewpoints, had different philosophical and theoretical and scientific traditions. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those when I give specific examples of research in different areas. But I just wanted to sort of highlight that because I think it was relevant to the discussion you guys are having. Okay, so I want to talk about conditioning. Sorry, I really like this cartoon. Okay, as Ida mentioned, this idea of conditioning can be attributed to Pavlov. He's a Russian scientist at the Institute for Experimental Medicine. And he won a Nobel Prize in 1904 for his work on the physiology of the digestive system. He used dogs as models, both for his work on digestion and for his ideas that would really form the basis of conditioning in psychology. And so he first observed that dogs would salivate in anticipation of food. Then he started ringing a bell when the food was presented. And then he found later that the bell would cause salivation in the dogs even in the absence of food, right? So it was, they had formed an association of this thing that co-occurred with the thing that they was directly causing the salivation in the first place. And so I just want to throw out a couple of terms because I think that they are relevant and useful for our discussions later on. So this idea of conditioning is linked to associative learning, right? So you're linking events, actions, or stimuli together through the process of conditioning. Now, you have classical conditioning, which links a stimulus to an anticipation of an event, like so the dog starting to salivate. And the process of conditioning is repeated exposure to the co-occurrence of a natural stimulus, like a food, with a stimulus that is normally neutral, so something like a ringing bell, right? And so then you're pairing those things together such that the bell becomes a stimulus that elicits this behavior. Okay, so turning the page to Skinner and operant conditioning. So B.F. Skinner, who I learned was also at IU. I don't know, Peter, is that? Yes, there we go. I don't know why I'm like, yay, but there we go. But before he was at Harvard, he was at IU. All right, anyway, here's Skinner with a bunch of his pigeons. So operant conditioning is simply the process of causing an increase or a decrease in a behavior over time due to reinforcement. And as I had mentioned, reinforcement can be either positive, so increasing the likelihood of the behavior, so getting a dog to do a trick for doing, you know what I mean. Yes, giving a dog a treat if they do a trick. And can also be negative reinforcement, which would decrease the likelihood of a behavior. And of course, this fundamental positive and negative reinforcement forms the basis for reinforcement learning, which we just heard about. I have a little quote from Skinner, but I think we can skip past that for the sake of time.
Pigeon now,
I want to show you this fun video.
I will try to.
But it's not. Hold on. I don't know why there's always a lag. Let's see if we can. Oh. All right, let's try it again. So this is Skinner.
Another pigeon now, and I will try to pick out some particular pattern of behavior and make it a more frequent part of the repertoire of the bird. Right, fine. This bird has been already conditioned to eat when the magazine sounds and the light flashes. Now we'll just watch its behavior a bit. It's not doing anything in particular, you see, but I'm going to try to get it to do something. Suppose I shape up the behavior of making a complete turn. What I do is simply, as I did then, to wait for some part of that behavior. There's more of it, you see. You can see that the effect is instantaneous. I'm waiting for it to turn counterclockwise now. And then I reinforce that movement. And I wait for a more pronounced movement than that. It's got to be more than that. There we go, all the way around.
Yeah, good job. All right, so a couple of things to take away from there. Obviously, this process can happen quickly, but also the time between a behavior and getting that reward is really important. So if you read anything on classical conditioning, operant conditioning, there's a distinct limit on the amount of time. So you cannot reward someone in an hour, tomorrow, next week, right? These are instantaneous things. Anyone who's ever tried to clicker train their dog, knows you're trying to capture a behavior. They're doing something and you're rewarding them for it right there. And they went, oh, I'm doing something, great. So it's about sort of disrupting that moment and forming that association in real time. However, it's not just simple behaviors. So I just want to show you. I didn't know this was going to lag all my videos. I'm sorry. I do have a lot of videos. I think this might, but it's, yeah. All right, great. We'll just show that again, because why not? So these are the kinds of things that you can train through conditioning, right? So no one took this dog, showed them how to shoot balloons with a hair tie and said, go and do it, right? You could do that with a human. You can do that, to some extent if you've trained an animal to learn in that way. But that is not something that, that sort of is intuitive, and that, you're not sort of watching that behavior, learning that entire program, and sort of internalizing that goal. So even something like this, very long, complicated behaviors, can be sort of shaped up through conditioning by stringing together different pieces of behavior. But this is not meant to be a pro-conditioning talk. This is meant to give you sort of a snapshot and to connect to Ida's work on reinforcement learning. So I think that this perspective has a lot of limitations. And I think the big question is, can every behavior be reduced to a history of reward? So enter, again, within the US, within middle of the 20th century, enter the cognitive revolution. So behaviorism did a lot of things, and some of them were good. So it introduced rigorous experimentation to the study of behavior. It really emphasized the role of environment on behavior, but it couldn't fully explain complex behaviors, particularly human language. So a lot of the pushback against pure behaviorism came from people who are interested in linguistics and in trying to understand human language. So Chomsky actually made a sort of a big name for himself early on in pushing back against behaviorism, specifically because of language. So cognitive psychologists in the middle of the 20th century were really interested in things like mental imagery, phenomenology, semantic memory, language, representation, simulation, projection, all of these very rich cognitive ideas that couldn't be boiled down to simple stimulus-response associations with external environment. So coming back to Tolman, great. And I will go quickly through this because I didn't know Ida was going to talk about Tolman. So when placed in a maze, rats will learn the shortest route to food. But what do they do when that route is disrupted? And Tolman's question was, do they learn through a series of stimulus-response sequences that they have been conditioned to? Or do they learn a top-down map of the environment? Do they have a cognitive map of that environment? So I don't have the Tolman maze. I really love that you had that in there. But we have another maze. We have a rat. Great. So step one, you give the rat an opportunity to explore the maze. Step two, you give the rat an opportunity to learn the location of a food starting from a particular point A. So after your talk, I went and quickly updated my cheese to a Ferrero Rocher, possibly my favorite chocolate, just in case anyone was wondering. Anyway, so they always put the rat here, and then the rat and the reward is always in the same place, right? So the rat learns this particular pattern of turns, and in that particular sequence, will get at the food. Now, step three is you put the rat back in the maze, but at a different starting point, right? So you put it over here. And now there are two competing predictions. One is this is where you would expect it to go if it were simply following that stimulus response pattern, right? So I had to carefully find something that had the same. It took like a really long time. Anyway, so this is the prediction you would make, right? It goes up, over, down. However, if it has instead learned something about the entire environment and isn't just isn't sort of running a program of behaviors that it was rewarded for, you would make this different prediction, right? That it would go down, it would, in fact, perform the opposite series of turns in order to find the delicious chocolate. And the second one is, just in case you were wondering, this is what they do. Yes?
I have a question though. Don't they have a strong sense of smell?
So, touche. Yes, and in these studies, it isn't actually a Ferrero Rocher. They actually are using, they'll use like rat pellets that taste like chocolate, but don't have, like, at least that's what they use now. They don't use actual chocolate. They have like a chocolate flavoring in them, and they'll have what they will do is like have other rewards that are like placed in other points of the enclosure, but that are not accessible to the rat. So they can't use olfactory, or we are trying as much as possible to control for potential olfactory cues. We do the same thing. I say we, like I don't study rats. I just say we people that study animals. You do the same thing when you're studying dogs. A lot of times you will have containers with false bottoms, so they always contain food, but they're not usually accessible. So that all of, in the case where, say you have two containers, one of which, and you're like, I'm going to point to this one. You should pick this one because it's the one I'm indicating. And I'm going to come back to this in a second. Chimpanzees are horrible at that task and can't do it. Dogs can be trained to do it, but don't do it intuitively. It really depends on the constraints of the task. But in a task like that, both cups are baited, so both of them have food in them, but only one of them is accessible to the dog. So you're trying to control for olfactory cues, absolutely, yes. There isn't just like a Ferrero Rocher and you're like, touche. Any other questions? Yeah?
I'm curious, how could the rat have any chance of doing the blue cup? I mean, it doesn't know, it's not like it has a GPS. And maybe related to that, I'm a bit confused with the distinction of stimulus response. So this to me, the red cup doesn't seem to me stimulus response because it's not responding to stimulus, it's just executing responses blind. And whereas stimulus response to me would seem to be that you're looking around and you have the visual stimulus or whatever stimulus of where there are walls, and you're actually responding to that. So blue, coming from a very naive perspective, seems to be more stimulus response than the red. So I'm trying to understand these two issues that.
Yeah. No. I think that's a really fair criticism. So the way I think about it is that basically the rat has been rewarded for going, 2 steps to the north, turning left, going 4 steps, right? That is something that has been reinforced multiple times, like doing that little dance, right? So just that sort of sequence of physical behaviors, the rat, has learned, just as the dog is like, I'm hitting that balloon with the thing, right? With the hair tie. Like if it's getting rewarded after that, then it has learned to kind of link that together in a program. And so then if it were just learning that program, then it shouldn't matter sort of where you put it. It should try that program in order to get rewarded. But what it is doing instead is that it is modifying that and relating it to some kind of internal representation of the space. That is the argument. And the mazes that they use aren't actually this complicated. This was just, I had to find one that would allow me to draw the little similar things. So maybe we could think about it like this. But yeah, it isn't saying that in this case, the rat isn't responding to any cues in the environment. Obviously, it's moving, it's not hitting walls, it's doing things, but it hasn't been rewarded for performing that series of turns and that number of steps before. And so it can't just be that it's learned how to search for the food in that space from the reward sequence that it had been trained on. Yeah.
Just to add to that, there's also a shortcut condition and a detour condition in the original Tolman experiments, which means what happens if you block the path? Does it find its way around? And doing that requires having a map. Or what happens if it randomly knows there's another shortcut? Is it going to take the path that was reinforced, or will it be able to take the shortcut? So those are the other conditions that confirm what Erica was saying.
Thanks. Yeah.
No, I guess it seems like the stimulus response, the way it is described, would work if the smell was there. Because as it is moving, one step is not if it's smell, the smell is getting stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just don't remember actually, like from that study, like how they've scented the maze. I mean, that is something that they try to control for any animal that's like, is searching olfactorily. But certainly, if it were just right, if it were like a real Ferrero Rocher and there were no competing smells, then it's just going beep 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 beep, beep 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 beep. Right, it's just a hot and cold thing. There have been a lot of experiments, and it's not just this one. In the 40s, there have been a lot of experiments, looking at like mental maps of spaces, and not all of them were done with rats. I'll talk about some other ones tomorrow when we talk about navigation. But I do think it's something that there is, fairly strong evidence across species and across different study designs that argues that at least some animals are capable of forming mental maps of an environment that allow them to do things like take shortcuts that they've never been on before and to do certain interpolate paths. And find new solutions. Yeah.
Is it just what it does first, or what it ends up doing? Because if it does the red one first, and then does once it finds that it's not there, then does the blue, or what?
Yeah. So it doesn't try that, and then when it fails, right? So it's like I think it sort of orients itself in the environment, but doesn't go check that out. That's why I drew it like around a corner. So it isn't just that it moves here, sees that it isn't there, right? It would have to go actually like check it out. It doesn't do that. But yeah, that's a great point. Okay. Yeah.
Has it been related to these parts, the other parts of the
Yeah. So it has a lot of experience with the environment.
Okay.
So like this is they always use the rats live like 3 years, and they might have, a year and a half of experience just tootling around in the maze. So like this is a very familiar environment for them. It would be like, IPAM for Dima or Mark. Yeah.
Would you know what happens if you remove the food, place the rat in that position? Where would it go? Because it knew that there was a food before. Which path would it take?
Yeah, I don't know. Ida, do you know? I don't know that in this set of studies, I don't think they ever did that particular experiment where like they didn't put the food there, they put the rat where the food should be, and then saw what the rat did. But
they did it in latent learning. In latent learning, there was no food at all for a while. They learned the maze, then they introduced it somewhere, and they learned the path faster than the rodents who had the food before they had explored the maze.
But would it go back to the place where it used to be food?
So in the second, I see what you're saying. So to do reward revaluation, which is it's one location and then another location, that I don't know if Tolman did, but others did. Mm-hmm. It turns out that the extent to which a rodent replays the new path when they measure it actually corresponds to how often they will go to the new location as opposed to the old one. So that is something that in the replay paradigms, especially within the past 20 years, it's been very popular, and I can send some papers on that. I'll mention it in my second lecture.
And I know this isn't a question about physical mazes, but when I talk on Friday about episodic memory, I'm going to talk about some of John Crystal's work. He works with rats at IU and has done some really interesting work where where you can flexibly ask rats to remember things. Remember the thing you saw 3 things ago versus 5 things ago, and they have to be his interpretation. You all can give your own interpretations, but he argues that is a really nice demonstration of the fact that they sort of, in order to solve that task, they have to be keeping track of and able to project themselves back into different points in the sequence. So I think that might be relevant to this question. Okay, yeah.
Sorry,
no problem.
So how do you know that the rat is interested in the reward? Like if the rat doesn't go that way, like it could be either like it doesn't have that content or it's not attracted.
Yeah, so I mean, in a lot of these studies, rats were food deprived. I don't condone that. I just want to be clear, ethics of animal research. So a lot of times now, animals are not food or water deprived. And then you have to ask questions like, in our studies we do with apes, we present them with different options of foods to see what their personal preferences are. And so when we're doing a task and we expect that they will be motivated to get the food, it's not actually because they're hungry, they're fed their complete normal diet. It's because it's a treat they don't normally get, or it's something more interesting than their normal food, or their normal food is sort of a 4 out of 10, and then this is a 9 out of 10. And that might differ from ape to ape. And so that's something where when we're testing something like a great ape, we have to go in, do those food preference studies first to then say, Fred really loves apples, but Suzanne really loves Cheerios. And so we're going to test them with their personal favorite food. So the way that we test apes is a lot more similar to the way that you say test preschoolers. And that, we're not food depriving preschoolers. When they're doing a marshmallow task, it's have 1 marshmallow now or wait and get 2. That their survival is not dependent on them getting an extra marshmallow. And so it has to be, yeah. So I do think these are really good questions though. Okay, can I move ahead? Awesome. Okay, so some of the earliest sort of hints of cognition beyond classical and operant conditioning were these use of cognitive maps, so inferring shortcuts or alternative routes. Also, learning biases. So the fact that certain types of stimuli are easier to link together than others was seen as evidence that it couldn't be pure conditioning. So it is easier, because if it were just pure conditioning, then it shouldn't matter. 2 things, could be linked together. They shouldn't be, if there's nothing internal going on, if there's no bias towards one set of stimuli or, say, one context, then, you should be able to link to say avoid a particular place or a particular sound because you then get nauseous afterwards. You can do that, but it's much harder to train that than it is to train a taste with nausea. And so these sort of contextual differences in rates of learning was another one of the sort of sources of evidence to kind of push back against this idea that everything is simple stimulus response conditioned pairs. So I'm going to come back to some of these in my later lectures, but these are some, I put some in parentheses because there are obviously many, many current topics with cognitive approaches, but some of the ones that I want to highlight are thinking about intentionality of actions, behavioral flexibility, whether there's insight in learning, actively hypothesis testing. That does not mean, I think, what we might mean it in this space. Hypothesis testing really just means you have an idea about something and you are sampling the environment in a way to either confirm or disprove that hypothesis. So maybe that is what we mean, but it's not a scientific, it's, a rat isn't doing that scientifically. Deception, teaching, theory of mind, and then violation or policing of cultural norms. So one of the kind of dichotomies in animal cognition is thinking about implicit versus explicit learning, or sort of, you're aware of some kind of rule or some advance in knowledge, and you're not. And there are, even in species where, say, we don't want to say that they have an explicit understanding of a rule, like they couldn't describe it to you, you can still have these sort of inflection points in, I have strategy A, I try strategy B, I figure out it's awesome, I then do strategy B, then there's an improvement, and so you get this kind of stepped improvement. That's very different from an implicit learning curve where you are slowly and consistently getting better, but without ever having these inflections that are gained by a state transition in strategy. Okay. I'm going to talk about human bias, and then I think I will leave the methods part for tomorrow, and I'll work that into the sort of studies of content. So I like to talk about human bias because I think it's something that maybe a lot of people who haven't studied animals haven't explicitly thought about. So I like to say that we have a hard time thinking sort of quote unquote beyond the human or outside the human. I also want to emphasize, and I want to come back to what Ida said about, we have a hard time thinking beyond, our cultures, beyond our languages, beyond our philosophical frameworks. And what I am going to emphasize is that sort of one step sort of up from that is, as a species, we have a hard time thinking beyond or outside of the things that we share as a species. So as a species, humans have big brains, we rely strongly on vision, we're highly social, we're good with tools, we make artifacts, we manipulate our environments, we use all sorts of symbolic systems, we communicate mainly through sound, also sometimes vision. We have very long developmental periods. We are very helpless when early in those developmental periods. We rely a lot on extra parental care, and we teach each other. There are many other things that humans do. Those are just some that are often unusual in the animal kingdom writ large. We are bounded by our physical forms. We're upright, we're symmetrical, we have, we're very good at manipulating things with the appendages on our top. We're pretty crappy at manipulating things with the appendages on our bottom. But we're also limited by our cognition and by our imagination of other ways of being and seeing in the world. So I just want to throw out a couple of examples. So we're, I think, pretty limited in the assumptions that we make about the sensory worlds of other species. So here on the left, each of these pairs of pictures are the same flowers. These are, the left is how humans see them. On the right are insects that have UV sensitive vision, which is a lot of insects. So most of the pollinators will see not just this, they won't see this bright yellow flower, they'll see this bullseye, right? And so it's only once we are passing photographs and video images through different kinds of filters, transposing the light, that we're able to perceive some of the features of the environment that other species are. We have a really hard time thinking beyond human-like body plans. So just to give one example, octopus have small brain-like structures in each of their 8 arms, and over 2/3 of their neurons are located in their arms and body. And there's some evidence that their arms can act autonomously from their central nervous system. Some species can shed their arms to avoid predators, and the arms move and crawl away and distract the predators. And there's an unexpected level of information relay from the arms to the central brain that could potentially lead to generalized learning. And so this suggests that their arms and brain are connected in complex ways that are very unlike the way the human brain is connected to the rest of its body. We have a very hard time thinking outside of the time scale that is typical for us to perceive causality within. So what does something like communication look like when it happens over milliseconds versus seconds, hours or days or weeks, right? So the kinds of speeds at which you might have signals being relayed through mycelial networks, or for those of you interested in extraterrestrials, how would we recognize signals that were sent at speeds that are very, very unlike human communication? And finally, humans, and I felt absolutely, I'm not trying to say I'm above any of these things. I especially throughout my talk keep saying, well, the animal thinks this, right? So the way that a lot of us sort of talk about and think about cognition is based in one individual body, right? We think about like an animal interacting with the environment, a human interacting with the environment. But as we'll see, throughout these tutorials and throughout the next few months, you can think about collectives. You can think about dynamic relationships between individuals and collectives and back and all of these different scales. And I think that plants are a very interesting case to use as a sort of thought experiment for this, right? They're very alien to us in their sensoria and their body plans and their timescales, and they're stuck in one place, but they exist in different environments at the same time, right? They exist in the air, they exist on the ground, they exist underneath the ground. They influence each other in their access to resources in terms of light, in terms of water. They interact with other species and signal through those other species with other members of their own species. So they really have a very rich and interesting and very different interactive system than humans do. So why am I talking sort of on and on about how biased we are? I think that it is important to make visible some of these biases, not because we can necessarily completely erase them, but because I think making them more visible and being more aware of them will help us in our quest to think in new ways, right? To think beyond. So we're really good at looking for other human-shaped things. And we both tend to over-attribute and under-attribute those things to animals, to AI. And being aware of what sorts of things we are biased towards, I think, can help us avoid those. Okay, I'm going to skip this. Yes, great. I'm going to stop here, but I will preview. There you go. It's great. I'm going to preview this. We're going to start with this tomorrow. Yeah.
I think so. I mean, the excellent point at the end about human centralism. I'm actually kind of curious about a reverse side of that, with the behavioralist view that you described. That this purely stimulus response behavioralist view. Did the people, the researchers, like promoting it, or was that? Did they view that as capturing also humans, or did they exclude humans from, like, they had a kind of completely separate models for non-human animals and humans?
Yeah, I think it depends on which behaviorist you're talking about and what time period you're talking about. So, I think those models were originally developed for, based on animal behavior to explain animal behavior. They then were generalized in saying, this could explain human behavior as well. Then there were people who said, but it couldn't explain something like language, some people tried, some people said no, so there was a back and forth, right? And so I do think there was this attempt to extend and say, humans aren't super cognitive all the time, right? We're not just sitting, you can look at the sort of like remnants of some of these debates in like fast versus slow thinking, right? Or like how conscious or unconscious are responses to, our social rules, or if I'm standing, how close do I stand to someone? Are those things that like, oh, I'm uncomfortable? Is that because I'm calculating, or is that because I've become conditioned based on the society that I'm in and, X, Y, and Z, to stand at a particular distance. Does that, I don't know if you have like more of a,
the early people like Watson, they definitely thought this is about humans. Watson did experiments with children, and it's one of his famous quotes, like, give me any children and I'll teach them whatever you want. And then even the Milgram experiment was to study the effect of authority on behavior and how you can shape behavior that is totally obnoxious because authority says so. Even the Stanford prison experiment is inspired by it. So they really thought that, and if you read their kind of ideological ideas of society, it's kind of grim, and they actually had this idea that how to make capitalism control people's behavior in the long run. It's kind of, if you read those early 20th century, it's kind of uncanny, to be honest. So they really thought this is how humans work. And in fact, some people that are not dead yet, but have been retired, they would deny that they have internal life. So when you say, what about, for instance, hypothetical thinking or counterfactual thinking, they deny that it exists.
Yeah, Skinner made Skinner boxes for babies.
Exactly, yeah. Skinner boxes.
But I think there are other people who have said, well, that's how, pigeons behave, or that's how C. elegans behaves, but not humans, or, that's how dogs behave, but not humans, and chimpanzees, and, everyone draws a line somewhere else. So I do think there's been that debate, and people do kind of push back and forth and, come up with different test cases. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it's often because of a context of, as Ida was saying when she was talking behaviorism, like this is what it means to do it scientifically, like in, reflects a context of like, oh, like anthropomorphism is bad, so like we're going to not posit any interior life for things because that's what it takes to study it scientifically, etc. Which is very much sort of what is an ongoing thing in studying animals.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, Cody.
I'm trying to wrap my head around what would be like an example of like implicit versus explicit learning for like a chimp or something like that.
So there's certainly, say if you have an insight into like how a box is opened, or how, like say you have, something that maybe you're taking two different things that you've learned, but you learned them separately, and then you have this aha moment where you put them together, right? And then as soon as you realize, oh, I have to do, like, in order to do C, I have to first do A and then connect it with B, right? So there's a whole bunch of work on like, on using tools to make tools, right? And not just like I've been handed a tool and I can use it, but can I make it? And then people were like, aha, but only humans can use tools to make other tools. And then animal researchers were like, screw that, what? Hold my beer, And so I do think that there have been this sort of arms race of, not just acting, but like taking something and then using that to act on the environment, taking something else and using that to act on that thing in order to act on that thing. So these sort of chaining of, like subroutines in order to get like an overall program. And I do think that's where, you kind of have these like aha insight moments where it's, oh, I need to go get that other thing. It's not this slow learning process.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah.
In that video in the beginning with the chimp, Was she sort of a kind of a chimp prodigy, or I mean, like, kind of better than, you know, if you look at the best Rubik's Cube in the world versus the worst, there's a huge.
Yeah,
wondering
yeah.
if chimps are better in general with that kind of task.
Yeah, although, I mean, Pommel Horse guy is still better than I am at the Rubik's Cube. Steve Notorowski. It's great. A little plug there, Steve. Hit me up. It's cool. Anyway, so I do think that it's really, I mean, unfortunately, it's just impossible to say because you're not training 1,000 chimps, right? And so, you know, if you look at, say, language-trained animal experiments, like Alex the parrot, like, you know, seems like he's a freaking genius. But Irene Pepperberg, who, you know, trained Alex, purposefully didn't choose him herself. She asked the pet store owner to give her a random parrot because she didn't want to be biased in, you know, she wanted to see what you could do with any parrot. Kanzi, who, you know, is probably the most prolific language. Sorry, it's like weird that I'm have you up on there. I'll just go back to that. Sorry, Matt. I really enjoyed that. But it's, you know, so Kanzi, you know, was, I mean, still is. He's still with us. Alex is not. But, you know, Kanzi, you know, showed greater facility with manipulation of human linguistic symbols than I would argue any other ape. He, I think, had a very unusual exposure because he was initially not trained. His mother was being trained. And she was nursing him, and he was hanging out, and he was just watching her. And one day he went over and solved something on the keyboard. And, you know, he was like learning by hanging out while she was being taught. And that is different from the way any other ape was ever trained. And so I do think that, you know, if you could have 100 Kanzis, would they all be that good? Maybe. You know, if the NSF like wants to fund that, we would learn something. But you know, I think it's just really difficult to say. I mean, with Ayumu, there are other apes that were trained in that task, and you know, they are good. She's the best one. But I mean, I think, you know, a handful have been trained, not 100. No. And I don't know whether they are all better than people, but I know at least she is. But she's I believe, I mean, they are not, it's not like she is orders of magnitude better than everyone else. So, okay, thank you. I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Okay.